print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Donald, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, March 27th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Iran's missiles still wreak havoc, despite pounding by U.S. Israel. By David S. Cloud, Dov Leiber, and Milan Kresny. The U.S. and Israel are pounding Iran's missile launching sites, hitting some over and over across almost a month of the war. But the missiles keep flying. Tehran shifted its firing from deeper inside its territory with longer-range missiles. Military analysts and former U.S. officers said after airstrikes early in the war inflicted a heavy toll on Iranian bases and truck launchers near the Persian Gulf coast, Iran is firing far fewer missiles than earlier in the war, down to around a dozen a day. But they have turned them against less defended targets in Israel and Gulf Arab states, causing greater damage in some cases. Even in small numbers, the weapons have helped Tehran achieve its goal: prolong the conflict, raise the economic costs of oil-exporting Gulf countries and in the U.S., and survive to fight another day. They're not doing the big volleys like they were during the early days, but they don't need to, said retired General Joseph Votel, former commander of U.S. Central Command. All they really have to do is get something through, and they can get a big bang for the buck. The resilience of Iran's missile system to sustained U.S.-Israel bombing raises the prospect that a key war aim, preventing Tehran from threatening the Middle East with missiles and drones, will remain unfilled, with President Trump looking for a speedy end to the war in the coming weeks. Iran is begging with the U.S. for negotiations to end the war, Trump said Thursday at the top of a cabinet meeting. Of course they're negotiating. They're obliterated. They wouldn't negotiate. Who would negotiate? Trump wrote on social media Thursday that he was pausing strikes on Iran's energy sector for 10 days so peace negotiations can take place. His previous deadline was Friday. Trump's top Iran envoy, Steve Witkoff, said Thursday during the cabinet meeting that the U.S. sent Iran a 15-point plan to end the war. Iran is open to the possibility of talks, but deems the U.S. proposal excessive, with demands that it dismantle most of its nuclear program, end support to the regional allies, and cap its missile program. People familiar with the matter said Iranian and Arab officials said Tehran ruled out discussing Iran's missile program as a starting point to the talks. Iran also doesn't want to commit to ending enrichment of uranium forever, they said. Halting the war with Iran's missile arsenal damaged but still intact would allow it to rebuild over time, some analysts said. If you cut the operation short, then the regime or any rump state that survives would almost certainly go and extract those missiles and launchers in a post-conflict scenario, said Bahim Ben Tablu, director of Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a Washington nonprofit that favors overthrowing the Tehran government. The difficulty is illustrated by continued U.S. airstrikes on Iran's Ayman Hassan Strategic Missile Headquarters near the city of Yazd, an important hub for the regime's Khorramshahr missile, a weapon with a massive warhead that can travel more than 1,200 miles. Satellite photos show that on Saturday, the underground facility appeared partly caved in and smoke rose from the base, the aftermath of a U.S. strike. U.S. and Israel warplanes attacked at least 3 times at the site dug into the mountains south of the city, including once early in the war when airstrikes demolished buildings on the surface and damaged several hillside entrances. It was unclear whether Iran was able to continue firing from Yazd, but strikes over several weeks suggest Iran is finding ways to adapt to the U.S.-Israel air campaign, military analysts said. A desert city 500 miles from the coast, Yazd is a challenging target for U.S. and Israel during its 12-day war with Iran last summer. Israel first tried to take out the facility in a daylight strike, one of the farthest attacks inside Iran that is conducted. Yet the U.S. or Israel warplanes returned the facility at least twice since the February 28 start of the war. There are signs that relentless bombardment is taking a toll. Iran upgraded the latest version of the Khorramshahr in 2017, with a more stable propellant reducing the amount of time it takes to prepare the missile for launch. Yet several blew up during the launch, a person familiar with the incident said. Other Iranian bases have been struck multiple times. At Hejabad, another missile facility in southern Iran, there are signs of escalating airstrikes. A picture of the base by the commercial satellite company Planet Labs on the second day of the war showed 3 destroyed vehicles outside tunnels leading to the underground facility. A video released by Central Command on March 20th showed a location being hit again with heavy munitions. The U.S. and Israel military said they are methodically taking out Iran's missile capabilities. U.S. and Israel warplanes hunted Iran's missile-carrying mobile launchers and circled over dozens of cavernous bases, striking when the vehicles emerged to fire. Waves of heavy bombers dropped munitions on sites, entombing the Iranian weapons below the ground in some locations. The result of this is that Iran no longer appears capable of launching missiles and drones by the hundreds as it did in the opening week of the war. Its missile production facilities have been decimated, making a quick rebuild of its arsenals a far steeper task. Navy Admiral Brad Cooper, the top commander in the region, said Wednesday that the U.S. has hit 10,000 targets in Iran, and Israel has hit thousands more, noting that Iran's drone and missile launch rates are down by more than 90%. Over 2/3 of Iran's missile, drone, and Navy ship production facilities are destroyed. Israel's military said it destroyed at least or disabled about 330 of Iran's estimated 470 mobile missile launchers. About half of those were destroyed in strikes, and the other half were rendered unusable after it struck tunnel entrances to underground facilities where the launchers are kept hidden before surfacing before an attack. Israel estimated Iran had as many as 2,500 ballistic missiles before the war started. Israel races to hit Iran's arms production. By Don Lieber. Jerusalem. Israel has shifted the focus of its air campaign from destabilizing Iran's ruling regime to crippling its military-industrial base, hoping to deliver a more lasting setback in the time remaining before it has to stop the fight. The pivot comes as Israel officials have become convinced President Trump could soon try to end the war. People familiar with the matter said, after more than 18,000 strikes by the U.S. and Israel over the past 4 weeks, Israel's military has worked through its priority targets and is returning to its sites again to deepen the damage. The shift is another sign Israel has given up on hopes of bringing down Iran's regime from the air. Trump and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said from the war's outset the operation aimed to create the conditions for Iranians to overthrow their government. Israel has carried out a wide-ranging campaign against Iran's internal security forces since the start of the war, even hitting individual checkpoints and police cars. But Israel and the U.S. since have concluded that any uprising would be unlikely to succeed against a still entrenched government. Israel's military hasn't declared any strikes on Iran's internal security forces since the beginning of the week. Netanyahu has stopped publicly calling on Iran to prepare to overthrow the government. Israel is now focused on wearing down Iran's capacity to rebuild its military. This week it says it hit weapons and naval cruise missile production sites in Tehran, an underwater research center in Isfahan used to make submarines, and an explosive materials production site in Isfahan. It looks like it's moving from the operation to dislocate the regime and push it off balance to one that is taking advantage of this opportunity to reduce Iran's military capabilities before they call it a day, said Faizan Nadami, a senior fellow with the Washington Institute, a U.S.-based think tank. Almost every military-industrial factory I know of has been struck, most of them at least twice, he said. They are very systematic and meticulously in this regard. Middle Eastern intermediaries have worked to open a diplomatic path to ending the war. Mediators said Iran and the U.S. each have staked out aggressive positions that make an agreement unlikely, but they are continuing to push for the two sides to meet in the upcoming days. Trump has told associates he hopes to wrap up the war in the coming weeks. We don't know how much time there is until we will be some kind of a deal, said Amar Avari, a former senior Israeli defense official close to the current government. So, really destroying the industry and eliminating top commanders and dealing with the ballistic missile launchers, this is a top priority. Saudi Arabia drops plans for a ski resort in desert. By Elliot Brown. Saudi Arabia canceled 2 large construction contracts at one of the most ambitious projects in the world, scuttling plans to bring skiing to the desert kingdom. The canceled contracts are part of the $38 billion arid mountain resort known as Trojana, which its managers once said would be the first outdoor ski resort in the Persian Gulf, a world-class center for winter sports and adventure. Trojana is part of the Saudi Arabian signature NEOM project, a state effort to build a futuristic region to power the country's economy. Italy-based Webuild said Wednesday that NEOM canceled its contract to build a $5 billion dam, which was meant to make a mountainside lake and was in the midst of construction. Malaysia-based Eversande Corporation said Tuesday that NEOM had ended its contract to supply the site with steel. The cancellation of the contract spelled a near certain end to the goal of completing the project anytime soon, people familiar with the effort said. A spokesperson for NEOM didn't respond to a request for comment. It isn't clear if the timing of the contract terminations is related to the Iran war, which has disrupted the country's oil industry. Facing construction hurdles and bulging budgets, Saudi Arabia has been paring back its large-scale projects since last year. Unlike other parts of the NEOM master plan, they were scaled back last year before much physical building took place. Trojena was years into construction. Giant steel structures meant to hold hotels and a massive set of elevated ski runs have risen in what was meant to be a ski village. The project was planned as a geography-defining statement of Saudi Arabia's ambitions. The Red Rock Mountains near the Jordanian border get occasionally dustings of snow, but NEOM planned an effort to pump disseminated water up a 1.8-mile lake using the water for a giant snowmaking operation that would blanket slopes and elevated ski runs with powder. The country agreed to host the 2029 Asian World Games in the site. Architects drew up renderings for massive mansions that looked like they were out of a Star Wars or Dune. Engineers blew up part of the mountain to make room for a hotel carved into a blasted stone walls. The dam, which is 30% complete, was meant to be an archaeological natural centerpiece bowing outward in defiance of standard engineering in which dams arc inward. Costs grew repeatedly. NEOM documents from 2023 show the price tag swelled to $38 billion, double an estimate from 2 years earlier, the Wall Street Journal previously reported. Just a few months ago, Trojena appeared to be one of the few projects at NEOM envisioned to hold 9 million people. That was preceding a space even other parts of the site were facing major cutbacks. Webuild said it would receive payment for work to date and the costs related to stopping the project. The pullback leaves a sprawling set of partially built structures in the midst of the mountains just south of the Jordanian border. Images posted by construction workers on social media show the bed of a huge lake laid with sandy soil and giant concrete structures at its edges. Nearby, a planned ski village is a web of steel skeletons reaching over 100 feet high. In 2024, Trojena executives said that the project required 130,000 tons of steel, double what was used in the Empire State Building. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. GOP presses for emergency TSA funding by Natalie Andrews and Siobhan Hughes and Terrell White. Washington. Several Senate Republicans pressed the White House to consider declaring a national emergency to free up money to pay Transportation Security Administration agents if lawmakers fail to reach a deal, people familiar with the matter said. The prospect of action by President Trump could raise pressure on Senate Democrats as both parties raced Thursday to reach a deal funding the Department of Homeland Security ahead of a self-imposed weekend deadline. Invoking the National Emergency Act, the people familiar with the matter said, could give the administration flexibility to use unspent government funds to temporarily pay TSA workers. The push comes as millions of Americans prepare to travel for spring break and the Easter and Passover holidays. In a meeting of Senate Republicans, Senate Majority Leader John Thune said the White House was weighing an unilateral move to fund TSA, according to Senator John Kennedy. The White House is having discussions about a number of ideas to blunt the impact of the Democratic shutdown crisis, but no preparations or plans are currently underway, said White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. The best and easiest way to fund TSA agents is to fund DHS. Senate Republicans framed any move by the White House as a fallback plan if negotiations to fund DHS, which houses TSA, make no progress. Republicans have a 53 to 47 majority in the Senate, but advancing a DHS funding would typically require 60 votes in the chamber. Democrats blocked funding for DHS last month as they sought tighter rules and immigration enforcement tactics. As the standoff has intensified, Republicans have searched for other ways to fund DHS and pay TSA agents. If both parties don't reach a deal, Kennedy proposed funding TSA in a standalone measure and then approving spending for the rest of DHS using an action called budget reconciliation, which allows measures to clear the Senate and a simple majority. On Thursday, Thune said he has given the Democrats what he termed as a last and final offer. The proposal would fund all of DHS except the part of ICE that handles enforcement and removal operations. That would mark a cut of about $5.4 billion, roughly half of ICE annual discretionary budget. The offer also includes a $20 million for body cameras that was contained in a version of the DHS funding bill that passed the House. Under revised language, the proposal aims to block Customs and Border agents as well as ICE Homeland Security investigations units from redeploying agents to carry out simple arrests and deportation functions, people with the matter said. We're at a point where everyone's getting edgy. They will have to make a final decision, said Senator Peter Walsh, but it's also at the point where all this knew that's what's required. Any effort by the administration to use unspent funds to temporarily pay TSA employees could be challenged in a court. The Audit Deficiency Act prohibits federal spending without an appropriation by Congress. LA, Miami, and San Diego shrink on immigration drop by Paul Overberg, Harriet Torrey, and Max Rust. Some of the biggest U.S. metro areas are shrinking, new government data show. The driver is a sharp slowdown in immigrants, coupled in many places with losses from people leaving for other parts of the country. The result? The Los Angeles, San Diego, and Miami areas, 3 of the 20 largest metros in the U.S., all saw population declines in the year through June 25, according to a Census Bureau estimates released Thursday. The data also show New York City shrank for the first time in 3 years, though the much larger metro area grew. The new census figures include population changes for metro areas and counties, plus select cities such as New York that fit neatly within the county lines. The numbers show in closer detail how immigration restrictions have significantly slowed U.S. population growth. The vast majority of the slowdown of immigration is because of policy shifts, said Eric Finnegan, Vice President of Demographics Research at John Burns Research and Consulting. Strong growth continued in many metro areas, too often in mid-sized and smaller ones across the Carolinas, Texas, and the Mountain West. Among those growing at 4 times the national rate or more, Austin, Texas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Ocala, Florida, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, Boise, Idaho, and St. George, Utah. As part of the President Trump's second term last year, government agencies stepped up efforts to detain and deport migrants, tightened pathways to legal immigration, and effectively shut down crossings at the southern border. The latest census data also reflect curbs of the admission of people seeking asylum that the Biden administration adopted in its waning months. The Census Bureau previously reported that the U.S. population only grew 0.5 in the year ending last June, the slowest pace since COVID-19 cut off immigration flows and caused a surge in deaths. The year before, the overall population grew almost twice as fast. A new record low U.S. birth rate and an aging population also break U.S. population growth. The immigration drop-off is having a profound effect on places that rely on newcomers for growth. Half of the 50 largest metros lost more people than they gained from the rest of the U.S. in the last year through June. And 10 of those 50 domestic losses top immigration gains. These declines hit the core of some of America's biggest metro areas. In the most recent measured year, the Los Angeles region modest 38,500 net gain in immigration was nowhere near enough to balance a net loss of nearly 130,000 domestic migrants. A similar issue shrank the population in Metro Miami, another pricey region that is losing people rapidly to other parts of the U.S. The Miami area saw a net loss of nearly 114,000 domestic migrants in the year through last June. New York City swung to a slight loss after 2 years of gains, leaving a population of 8.58 million, down 2% from 2020, when COVID started causing a big exodus. The net gain of about 66,000 immigrants in the most recent year was down 70% from the influx a year earlier and was too small to offset people moving away. The huge New York metro area, which includes 17 counties outside the city, grew 0.2%. Population shrink or grow based on 3 factors: domestic migration, international migration, and the difference between births and deaths. Big urban areas tend to win young people at the start of their careers, then lose them to the suburbs when they have families. Urban hubs also attract the lion's share of immigrants. For big metros, a substantial stream of immigrants will have a big difference in whether they grow or decline, said Kenneth Johnson, professor of psychology and demographics at the University of New Hampshire. The drop in immigration is leaving a mark in smaller metro areas. especially along the southern border. Metros there, including Laredo, Texas, and Yuma, Arizona, saw some of the biggest percentage declines in population growth rates in the most recently measured year. The Census Bureau compiles its estimates from various government data sources. It doesn't distinguish between immigrants in the U.S. illegally and those with legal status, including those seeking asylum or in temporary protected status. The Bureau's immigration estimates are a net number that reflects people coming to and leaving the U.S. The U.S. saw 675,000 deportations in the first year of Trump's second administration, according to the Department of Homeland Security. A recent Wall Street Journal analyst suggests that more people moved out of the U.S. than moved in last year, something that has indefinitely occurred since the Great Depression. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Court losses threaten further trouble for Meta, by Aaron Mulvaney, Megan Brobowski, and Eric Schwartzel. Los Angeles. For Meta Platforms, which has made $60 billion in profit last year, getting hit with legal damages of a few $1 million is ordinarily a non-event. But back-to-back jury verdicts holding a company liable for harms to young people could open a new way to a flood of litigation that can force it and other social media giants to make significant changes to the way they design and deliver their products. This is the view of some legal experts, but also the stated position of Meta itself, which argued heading into the trials in California and New Mexico that for jurors to endorse theory of the cases against them would challenge their ability to keep serving products used daily by billions of people. The judgments for the plaintiffs threaten to undermine long-held protections that have shielded internet companies for decades. They suggest future jurors might be receptive to a product liability argument against social media, which forms the basis of thousands of similar lawsuits waiting to be heard. And they encourage new plaintiffs to come forward, raising a prospect of mass litigation that could stretch for years and lead to settlements or changes to the industry, akin to the legal campaign against the tobacco industry in the 1990s. A New Mexico jury on Tuesday found that Meta exposed minors to harmful content, including online solicitation, sexually explicit content, and human trafficking under consumer protection laws. Within 24 hours, a Los Angeles jury issued a verdict in a similar case, saying Meta and YouTube contributed to mental health issues of a 20-year-old woman, Kelly G.M., because the addictive nature of the products. The California case was the first trial of thousands of consolidated lawsuits filed teenagers, school districts, and state attorney generals against Meta, YouTube, TikTok, and Snap. More trials are scheduled for this year. TikTok and Snap settled the first case but are on the hook for the others. Omari Ben-Shahar, a law professor at the University of Chicago, said the verdicts reflect an expansive view of the tech company's ability for their products. What is new is the addiction element, he said. That could create a very broad liability. The notion of addiction, there is something very abstract about it. The ruling in the Los Angeles bellwether case could have significant ramifications for Meta and a swath of other internet platforms. The tech giants have long argued that they couldn't be held liable for third-party content posted to their platforms, citing Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. That measure is credited in part with fueling the growth of social media companies. The plaintiff's lawyers in the Los Angeles case sidestepped Section 230 by arguing that the way the platforms themselves were designed was harmful and intentionally so. The success of the argument is now sending shockwaves through the tech world. This has potentially large impacts on other areas in tech, AI, and beyond that, said Jessica Nail, a San Francisco lawyer who represents tech companies and executives. The floodgates are already open. Meta said it would continue to fight and focus for the evidence in each case, and noted that the damages awarded in New Mexico case were far less than the plaintiffs had sought. The plaintiffs had sought nearly $2 billion and were awarded $375 million. In the Los Angeles case, the plaintiffs was awarded $6 million. Mark Lehner, the plaintiff's lawyer, said he purposely didn't ask for a specific amount of damages. Teen mental health is profoundly complex and not be linked to a single app, a Meta spokeswoman said. After Wednesday's verdict, we will continue to defend ourselves vigorously as every case is different, and we remain confident in our record of protection teens online. A spokesman for Alphabet's Google, which owns YouTube, said it would appeal to and disagree with the verdict in the California case. Ahead of the trials, Meta argued for the lawsuits to be thrown out and said that many of the design features at issue, such as instant notification and infinite scroll, were inescapably linked to the content shown to users. This could prompt a flood of litigation, it warned, causing the company to change how products deliver information to avoid liability. Meta also said the cases erode Section 230 and the First Amendment protections. In a briefing with reporters after the verdict in Los Angeles, Meta said it has been invested in identifying solutions to help teens for over a decade. Then it has built tools and resources to give teens a safer, positive experience. Those include teen accounts with heightened protections or messaging and content access. Hundreds of millions of teens have teen accounts, which were introduced in 2024, Meta said. In remarks ahead of jury deliberation over the punitive damages, Louis Lee, the lead trial lawyer representing YouTube, said the platform has instituted features to interrupt long sessions and give parents an indication how much time their children are spending on their phones. They're not perfect, he said, adding, you can't walk into someone's phone and turn on all these features. The 7-week trial was emotional at times. Parents, some of whom blamed social media for their children's suicide or drug overdoses, entered a lottery system each day for seats. Sometimes there were tears during testimony. 2 jurors interviewed after the verdict said that the 8 days of deliberation were filled with questions about culpability and what signal they wanted their decision to send to Meta and YouTube. They had to weigh conflicting expert testimony and research about the harms of social media to young people. One juror, Victoria, who only gave her first name to protect her anonymity, said Meta chief executive Mark Zuckerberg's answers on a stand came across as inconsistent. That didn't sit well with us, she said. She said she seemed he seemed unprepared, a position she said was surprisingly for the guru whose products were at the center of the case. Victoria said she wasn't a regular user of social media before the trial. She planned to stay off it. JFK Jr.'s magazine was a bust, but now everyone wants a copy. Back issues of George are suddenly in demand and fetching high sums. By Sam Shrub. The bidder offered $5,000 for a stack of magazines that had been sitting on a shelf in Chip Fattel's closet for more than 20 years. But Fattel wasn't biting. I'm going to hold them until I get what they're worth, the North Carolina retiree said. These weren't just any magazine Fattel is looking to sell. All 57 issues of George, the politics and cultural periodical founded by John F. Kennedy Jr. in 1995. And he is waiting to find a buyer who will keep the whole set intact. The magazine was a passion project for Kennedy, the charismatic scion of America's most storied political dynasty. It folded a few years after his untimely death in 1999, as sales slipped and advertising shrunk and became just another forgotten relic of a different era. Now, suddenly everyone wants a piece. Love Story, the limited TV series about Kennedy's romance with Carolyn Bessette, has fueled renewed infatuations with all things Kennedy and Kennedy adjacent. Backward driving caps, drugstore headbands, niche sunglasses, and one extravagantly lighted Indian restaurant in Manhattan East Village. And the show has turned a defunct magazine into a status symbol. Kennedy founded George with a stated ambition to cover his family business with enthusiasm and a wit of pop culture publication. Thanks to its fame, the magazine carried enormous expectations into its launch, and it managed to meet them at first, with early issues selling well and breaking advertising records. It did really well at the launch, said Matt Berman, who served as George's creative director until shortly after Kennedy's death. The first two magazines were like telephone books packed with ads. The debut, featuring supermodel Cindy Crawford dressed as a sexy George Washington, was especially buzzy. After a while, circulation grew somewhat morbidly after Kennedy's death. Revenue didn't. Publisher Hachette Filipacci Magazines folded the title in 2001. For years afterwards, George was something of a curiosity, a symbol of a strange and beguiling time in magazine publishing, beloved only by obsessive collectors and Kennedy complainants. A few years back, Garrett Colton picked up a bundle of issues for $1 at a garage sale, hoping to turn a profit. I couldn't really get anyone to bite, said Colton, who lives in St. Augustine, Florida. A sorcerer of vintage books and magazines, he wound up wholesaling them to a shop in New York. This week, poking around Facebook Marketplace, he saw issues going for $50 to $60 each on eBay. Copies of popular issues are now fetching hundreds of dollars. Colton was a sanguine about the development. He learned not get upset about something doesn't sell. George wasn't a terribly desired title among even print magazine observances until recently, said Eric Duran, a co-owner of Left Bank Books in Manhattan's West Village. He began stocking issues over the past 4 or 5 years, but found they sold slowly with a few expectations, most often to folks interested in design. What was and continues to be the easiest issues to sell is the very first issue with Cindy Crawford covered, which is iconic, he said. He sells standard issues for $30 a piece. The Crawford cover goes for $175. As a contemporary culture has moved online, vintage magazines have grown in popularity, especially among creative types looking for references material that isn't available to anyone with a phone. George appears to be attracting a different sort of crowd. I don't think most of these people that are buying George even know what George was prior to the show, said Jahal Johnson, a writer and creative in New York, who owns Vintage Magazine collection contains 3 issues of Kennedy's magazine. He grabbed his copy of the Crawford issue for a measly $5. Buying Infirma is part of the contemporary collective way and process popular culture, said Bejan Chevali, founder of the Brooklyn vintage shop Intermural. A certain kind of consumer, after watching a TV show that pulls at the heartstrings, immediately pulls out their phone and navigates to resale sites looking for vintage finds. There are plenty of copies of George available online for those willing to stretch their budgets. What there's less of is promotional merchandise like t-shirts and coffee mugs from that period. I was searching for the merch online and nothing was really coming up, said Catherine Sabora, whose Williamsburg, Brooklyn vintage shop Sabora does a brisk business with Bassett's many acolytes. So she and her e-commerce director whipped up a bootleg George tee and listed it online for $55. They sold out their initial run of 50. A second release of 60 is nearly gone. Still, nothing compares to the original. Sabora is keeping an eye on eBay, ready to strike at she finds a non-bootleg George t-shirt or 2. If she gets lucky, she doesn't plan on selling. I just want the original one for myself, she said. You are listening to a reading and articles and features from the Wall Street Journal and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Supplier Dispute Halts Jeep Cherokee Production by Ryan Felton. A continuing dispute between Jeep parent company Stellantis and a parts supplier derailed production of the new Jeep Cherokee, according to a lawsuit filed in Michigan on Wednesday. Stellantis said in a lawsuit that a factory in Toccoa, Mexico, has been shut down since March 14th because of a payment dispute with the supplier, ZF Foxconn Chassis Modules. The Mexican factory makes the Jeep, Compass, and Cherokee sports utility vehicles. The supplier, which makes suspension modules, stopped shipping parts to Stellantis' Mexican plant earlier this month after seeking additional price increases on contracts, according to the lawsuit. A court order in Mexico should result in operations in Toccoa resuming within the next day or two, Stellantis said. It wasn't the only dispute between the two companies. However, ZF Foxconn Chassis Modules also threatened to stop shipping crucial parts to Stellantis' factory in Canada unless the car maker agrees to pay tens of millions of dollars in price increases, the lawsuit said. The Windsor, Ontario factory, which makes the Chrysler Pacifica minivan and Dodge Charger, faced an immediate shutdown result of the dispute, but a temporary restraining order issued Wednesday by a Michigan judge ordered the supplier to resume shipments. That factory hasn't experienced any downtime, Stellantis said. Payment disputes between automakers and suppliers aren't unusual in the industry, but rarely spill over into court and result in parts shipments being halted. The interruption in production for Jeep and Chrysler also presents a potentially significant headache for Stellantis, which has been trying to engineer a turnaround after a dismal 2025 performance that ended in $26 billion charges amid a reset in its electric vehicle strategy. While turning to the court is never our preferred approach for resolving supplier matters, Stellantis will take appropriate steps to protect the integrity of our manufacturing operations and ensure fair business practices, the company said. The automaker was high hopes for the Cherokee and Pacifica in particular. The return of the Cherokee is expected to be a boon to sales for the rugged off-road brand, and an updated version of Chrysler's popular minivan is set to debut at the New York International Auto Show next week. ZF Foxconn chassis modules didn't respond to requests for comment. The company is a joint venture between the German supplier ZF and the Taiwanese technology giant Foxconn. A ZF spokesman said he had no comment on the lawsuit and referred questions to the joint venture. Foxconn didn't respond to a request for comment. The dispute illustrates how sensitive the auto supply chain can be and result in disruptions over a single component. Stellantis maintains less than a few hours worth of inventory of the chassis modules on hand, the lawsuit said, as can be common in the auto industry. As such, the company relies on continuous delivery of parts to keep the Windsor plant running. A stoppage of the Windsor plant could result in layoffs that extend beyond the factory and into suppliers and make other parts for the Chrysler Pacifica and Dodge Charger. The Windsor factory employs 5,500 workers. The issue between Stellantis and a joint venture dates to December, according to the lawsuit filed in Oakland County Circuit Court. At the time, Stellantis' U.S. affiliate paid more than $26 million and granted substantial price increase to avoid parts not being shipped, the lawsuit said. Stellantis said this emboldened the supplier, which again this month said it would stop shipping parts unless the automaker agreed to pay an additional $70 million in cash payments and price increases, according to the complaint. ZF Foxconn chassis module this week again threatened to stop shipping parts, according to the complaint. The Michigan judge temporarily restraining order on Wednesday required the supplier to resume part shipment to the Windsor factory unless the case is heard next month. A hearing is set for April 6th. Automakers say no fire disruption. Blaze broke out at a Fuyo glass factory that supplies parts to GM, BMW, Honda by Patrick George. Investigators are probing the cause of a fire that burned a section of a large automaker glass plant near Dayton, Ohio, that supplies components to several major automakers. The roof of the Fuyo Glass American plant, said to be one of the largest automotive glass manufacturing plants in the world, caught fire around 8:30 p.m. Sunday, according to city officials in Moran, Ohio. The blaze was under control by Tuesday evening, city officials said. No factory employees or fire crews were injured. Videos posted to YouTube and social media show that the fire could be seen from miles away on Sunday night. A FIO spokeswoman didn't return a request for comment. FIO's website said the factory supplies windshield windows and similar products to General Motors, Ford Motor, BMW, Honda, and other automakers. GM and Jeep parent Stellantis both said don't expect any impact from the fire. Ford declined to comment. Representatives from Honda didn't respond to requests for comment. A BMW spokesman couldn't immediately provide any information. The Chinese glass maker established the factory after taking over a closed GM plant a decade ago. FIO Glass America has since become a major automotive supplier that employs more than 3,000 workers. It was a subject of an Oscar-winning Netflix documentary, American Factory. The plant has also drawn controversy. Critics have accused FIO of undercutting local, long-standing rivals with low prices that can't be matched, as well as an unfair business and labor practices, the Wall Street Journal reported earlier this year. Federal authorities raided the plant in 2024, alleging that FIO and its affiliate companies conspired to transport, house, and employ undocumented immigrants. No one has been criminally charged in the case. FIO has denied any wrongdoing. Air Canada CEO and Language Flap by Paul Verrara, Ottawa. Air Canada Chief Executive Michael Rousseau issued an apology Thursday about his inability to speak French after facing sharp criticism from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Rousseau delivered this week an English-only video message with French subtitles about the fatal collision involving an Air Canada Express flight at LaGuardia Airport, killing 2 pilots on board. In the message, he offered condolences to families involved and provided an update on the crash investigation. I am deeply saddened my ability to speak French has diverted attention from the profound grief of the families and great resilience of Air Canada's employees, Rousseau said. Despite many lessons over several years, unfortunately, I am still unable to express myself adequately in French. I sincerely apologize for this, but I am continuing my efforts to improve, Rousseau said. Carney said Wednesday that Rousseau's demonstrated a lack of judgment, a lack of compassion, by delivering an English-only video message, and he also wanted to hear from the airline's board regarding the CEO's language skills. Air Canada, a former state-owned airline that was privatized more than 3 decades ago, is obligated under Canadian law to have a headquarters in Montreal and offer all services in both English and French. No other air carrier faces such a legal obligation. To speak French caused a public relations headache for the company in 2021 when the CEO said his work schedule hadn't allowed him time to learn and master French. At the time, the board chairman said Rousseau had started intensive French training. In the 2025 management proxy circular, the company said 6 of its 7 members of the executive committee are bilingual, and Rousseau has continued to act as his personal pledge to learn French. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 27 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Donald. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Buffalo Criterion, followed at 8 o'clock by the New York Times, and at 9 o'clock by Buffalo Spree. Stay with us for these readings and more throughout the day. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability